Have you ever rescued a piece of furniture out of the trash before? This abandoned Colonial revival dresser is about to get a glow up so that I can sell it for a profit and keep it out of the landfill. Trash picking for furniture is one of my favorite pastimes, and I've managed to build a whole business around it. I found this beauty during my town's last bulky item collection day, and I'm excited to give it a new finish that brings it into today's interior design preferences, but still pays homage to its traditional style. It's a colonial revival piece, which is a style that was really popular in the mid-century, and it's even got a stamp on the back with the date April 2nd, 1959. The antique label on here, though, is referring to the fact that it's impersonating the original colonial style of the 17th and 18th centuries, not because this one is an actual antique just yet. The top, sides, and drawer fronts are all built with solid maple. The drawers aren't dovetailed, but they're all in really good condition and sliding well. It's just got a few blemishes around the edges and isn't a particularly popular style as it is right now. So I'm going to give it a new look using a mix of some stain and paint so I can find this thing a new home. I do always take a quick peek inside drawers, especially down in the seams, to make sure there aren't any signs of bugs or other critters before I drag stuff home from the curb. And this one just had some pretty vintage wallpaper, a couple of unopened Band-Aid packages, and some buttons. No bugs. I have never been a fan of these colonial style or bat wing pulls, and it looks like the ones on the bottom drawers have already been swapped out at some point for these more simple handles. So these are all going to get popped into a baggie, and I'll donate them the next time I'm out at the thrift store. I do need to give this thing a good scrub before I go any further with it. One, because I found it in the garbage, and two, because furniture surfaces just collect a ton of dirt, grease, and dust from being in our homes no matter what. And in order to be able to get a good quality product out at the end of this process, I need to start with a clean slate. I popped my scrub brush attachment onto the drill and sprayed all of the surfaces down with some Simple Green, which is a great all-purpose degreaser, to break up all the crud before rinsing it all off again with some clean water and a microfiber rag. I'm digging through my hardware stash to see if I have enough of anything to replace the hardware with something a bit more modern, but still lends itself to the traditional style of the dresser, if that makes sense. I think on these top two drawers that have the little faux drawers, I want to replace the handles with a single knob. So I'm gonna have to fill in the holes on those. And then I want to keep some handles, I think, on these bottom drawers, but I don't know what I have. Oh, hey. It's even the same hole size. How many? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And I need 8, right? Right. Dang it. Okay, I will put in an Amazon order for 8 of those handles and 8 of the matching knobs. Perfect. To fill in the old holes on the top two drawers, I'm going to use this putty. It's a 2-part epoxy that comes in this little tube, and you slice off a small section at a time, mix the 2 different colored components in there together, and that starts the chemical reaction that hardens it. It does start to set up within a few minutes though, so like I said, I just do tiny bits, so I've got enough time to push it through each hole before it starts to stiffen up. Well, that finished setting, I got my sander out, hooked it up to my shop vac to collect some of the dust, popped my respirator on so I didn't breathe in the rest of the dust, and started stripping the finish off of the top with some 120 grit sandpaper because I wanted to restain this wood. This one spot was making me so nervous. It looked like an ink mark, and I was a little concerned that it may have soaked through the finish and left a dark, deep stain in the wood underneath. But luckily it disappeared just as easily as the finish around it, which was a big relief because I'm not sure how I would have dealt with that otherwise. Once I was done with the 120 grit, I switched it out for some slightly finer 180 grit to get any remaining finish or color out of the way and start smoothing down the grain again to get it ready for the new stain. And since my plan was to paint the body of the dresser, I just needed to scuff those surfaces a bit to remove the slicker finish on there and give my primer a bit of micro texture to really grab onto, and also buff out some of the more shallow scratches and dents that I could see. There was no need to strip sand this all the way back to bare wood. Once I was done with all the sanding, I wiped up the dust with my rag and some water, which cleans off the sawdust, and it also really helps highlight any flaws that I might have missed in the bare wood. I took a really good look over the top to make sure I couldn't see any of those little swirl marks that can happen when you use a mechanical sander. And while I was wiping down the rest of the dresser, I realized that I never filled in the chunks on the bottom, so I mixed up some more epoxy and shoved it in there. Usually on this style of furniture, I cut the wavy bits in the skirting boards into something more squared off and contemporary, or even cover it over with a new straight piece of trim. But I decided to leave it alone on this one because I kind of like the shape of it, and I wanted to leave that extra bit of character. To restain this top, I'm using a water-based stain in a much darker tone. I poured some out into a tray and then used a damp painting sponge to apply it. Water-based stains dry much faster than oil-based, and they can be a little bit tricky to work with because of that. So it really helps to apply a lot of it to give it some chance of staying wet and mobile while you're working. I always apply this stuff in the direction of the grain, and I try to go all the way down the length to minimize the chance of any stop-start marks. And as soon as I had the whole top covered, I went back right away with some shop towels, still moving in the direction of the grain, and wiped back any excess. It looks super dark from this angle, but after drying for a few minutes, this is what it looked like. After masking off my fresh stain job, I poured some primer out into another paint tray. This shellac-based primer will block in any tannins in the wood from bleeding up through my new paint color and staining it. And it's also going to seal up any of the more porous areas of filler or where I sanded back to bare wood to smooth something out so that the paint doesn't absorb into those spots and look different when it's dry. This stuff needs either denatured alcohol or ammonia in order to clean it up, and it's really excellent at sticking to the inside of my sprayer. So I choose to use these cheap rollers and line the tray with foil so that I can just toss that when I'm done and not have to worry about doing any of that in my sink. It's definitely not ideal, but this primer is the only product that I found to consistently and reliably cover all the bases that I need it to. I masked off the rest of the top with some paper and gave the dried primer a really light sand with some 400 grit just to smooth out any texture that was left by the roller before I laid out a drop cloth and wrapped up the rest of the drawers to protect their interiors as well. I'm going to paint with this tapestry color from Fusion Mineral Paint. I used it on the dining table that I refinished last week, and I figured it would be great to use up the rest of the jar here since I had so much left over. It's a kind of mushroom taupey beige color once it's dry. I poured about half of the pint through a paint strainer into my gravity-fed pneumatic spray gun and added about 2 tablespoons of water to thin it out just a tiny bit. Then I made sure that the pressure on my air compressor was set to 40 psi, which is the recommended setting for this sprayer. Pulled out a bunch of air hose, connected the gun, and then tested out the flow on a piece of cardboard to make sure that I liked how much paint was coming out, and then sprayed on the first coat. This paint can be brushed or rolled too. I brushed it onto the table base last week, but spraying's just faster and easier for me. Fusion needs about 2 hours to dry in between coats, so when I came back to do the second layer, I checked everything for little dust or fluffies that had landed in the first coat, gave it all a light sand with my 400 grit sandpaper again to knock any of that off, and wiped the dust away before I started on the second coat. Fusion is an acrylic resin paint that is super durable and even water and UV resistant all by itself, but I still needed to add some sort of protection to the wood top, and extra protection isn't a bad idea on most painted surfaces anyway, so I decided to spray on a few coats of my favorite, which is Diamond Wood Finish from Varathane, over everything. I tested out the spray again since this is a different consistency than the paint was, and I definitely turned the knobs while I was washing the paint out of it. So once I had the flow right again, I started applying it. I tried to go really heavy on the top since it was bare wood, and it's the surface that will take the most abuse, but sprayed a much lighter coat on all the vertical surfaces so that nothing started to drip. After about 2 more hours of dry time, I gave the wood a light sand because it was still feeling a tiny bit rough, really just barely touching the sandpaper to the surface. And once it felt nice and smooth again, I sprayed on the last layer. The next morning, I laid the dresser on its back so I could touch up this trim detail that I couldn't reach with the sprayer, nailed in some new nylon feet to help prevent any more chipping from happening around the bottom edge, and measured out the centers of each of these panels by running a straight edge from corner to corner so that I could drill holes for the new knobs. Here's a reminder of the dresser that got left out on bulk item trash day. Some wear and tear here and there, but definitely still sturdy, sound, and not ready to end up in the landfill yet. And here is my new version of it. I think it still has tons of its original traditional character, but in a contemporary way that more people are likely to use in their homes today. And when someone gets tired of this look down the line, hopefully it will get made over again and again and again. Thanks so much for spending your time with me while I worked on this project. I hope you enjoyed the whole makeover process and maybe learned a thing or two along the way. I'm going to leave some more furniture makeovers here for you to watch next if you want, and I will catch you all next time.